What's up? What's up? I'm Dr. Omatma, host of Egg Meet Sperm, where we're busting fertility myths, sharing tangible tips for your fertility journey, and bringing you the most knowledgeable guests to support your journey to parenthood. This podcast is for both women and men because getting fertile as fuck is for both partners, don't you think? Remember, just listening to this podcast won't get you pregnant, but following the tips we share just may. Let's get you fertile AF so that you can co-create the family you dream of. And if your partner's not listening to this, make sure to share this episode with your partner. Hello and welcome to Egg Meet Sperm. I'm your host, Dr. Omatma, and my guest today is a dear friend from long ago. We have known each other a very long time, and she is so amazing. Her name is Bridgit Danner. She is a licensed acupuncturist since 2004 and has certified in functional diagnostic nutrition since 2015. After losing everything to toxic mold, Bridgit now educates about toxins, on how to detoxify with a functional healthcare approach through her online community at bridgitdanner.com. She is the author of the Ultimate Toxic Mold Recovery Guide, Take Back Your Home, Health, and Life, available on Amazon. Hi, Bridgit. Welcome. Thank you so much for being
Hi,
here.
thanks for having me.
And it's so nice to like reconnect and see you again and just all the things. I know we're not in person, but hey, Zoom is
Yeah,
good.
for sure. I mean, I feel like a lot of us sort of lost touch with COVID and lack of conferences and
I
stuff.
know. I know. Well, I'm really glad that we're here. And some of the work that you've been doing, I've been following it online. It's so amazing that you're talking about this because I do think that it's a really huge issue. And yeah, so let's dive in. Let's talk about mold, which is so much fun to talk about. What are the symptoms or signs that we might see of mold toxicity in our bodies?
Yeah, so it's really quite varied because the toxins from mold can really invade and alter any system. And what's kind of like ironic, I'll share, especially being on this show, is some of my early symptoms were like breakthrough bleeding. Um, and so I was just sort of told that it was like stress and this kind of thing. But other symptoms I had early on was like increasing insomnia, anxiety, catching a lot of colds and flus, food intolerances. So, some things that can really be overlapping. Later on, when I got sicker, um, really deep fatigue, I got strep throat that I didn't recover from. Um, And then, like, once we started messing with our house and not the right way, I developed like eye twitching, muscle twitching, really poor recall, like really poor short-term memory. So it can get into some, pretty strong neurological things over
Mhm.
time. So that's why it can be tricky, because just because you have mold in your environment doesn't mean it's visible. So you can be getting sicker and sicker or experiencing different things. Different people in the family could have different things, or
Mm.
some could have apparently seemingly nothing. And, you just don't think about your environment. So that was sort of the track that I was on, like not thinking about it, not realizing.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can make it aware today that is something to consider. I would say anytime there's like chronic symptomology that isn't responding to other things you're doing, and that can include infertility, miscarriage. It's good to be aware of this issue because it could be affecting you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious when you started having the breakthrough bleeding, because that's a very like interesting symptom for the fertility world. Was that, did you also coincide that with hormonal changes, or was there no Like, did your hormone test looks normal? I don't know if you even tested your hormones, but I'm curious if it had a direct impact on hormones.
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember if I had any testing early on with the breakthrough bleeding. I don't think I did. I think I did more, I was trained as an acupuncturist, so I don't, I wasn't really in like the lab mentality in the beginning, but later I did have a Dutch test run, and my hormone levels were like super low, just super low. Like, I think I was about 40 at the time, but it was looked like I was about to go into menopause. Um, so we can talk more about how mold affects
Hmm.
hormones
Yeah.
specifically, but yeah, that's a very specific symptom that some people kind of dismiss, but I'm like, that's not normal. Now I'm 48 and I don't have breakthrough bleeding. So it wasn't like an age thing. It wasn't a stress thing either. It was being in this moldy environment. So yeah, later I had really low hormone levels, and there was something on my Dutch test. I forget which marker they say. I think it's something about how you metabolize cortisol that said, well, this can be indicative of thyroid issues. So then I had my thyroid tested, and I had some Hashimoto's antibodies and low
Mm.
thyroid. And then after that is when I found mold. So this is actually pretty common that people start gathering more and more testing, finding more and more things wrong. And they
Hmm.
still may not think mold, right? They may say, oh, well, there's something wrong with my thyroid.
Right.
That's the problem.
Right.
And you may be able to get pregnant by adjusting your hormones that way. But again, really it's that deeper root if that is affecting you.
Yeah, and it's sort of like if you have mold in your house, it's sort of like you are trying to treat all these things that are popping up externally, but then you still have the mold happening. So it's still like driving your body physiologically out of whack while all of these other things are trying to get treated. Like, oh, I should deal with my thyroid, and oh, I should deal with my adrenals, and this and that and that and that. Whereas like until you're out of that environment or have dealt with the mold somehow, and I know we're going to get into how to do that, it's really hard to like get all these other things to actually line up.
Yeah, it's like a whack-a-mole situation. And I think that can be true with a lot of different kind of conditions like Lyme and heavy metals and like, you know, what any of those conditions that can affect a lot of systems. Yeah, I mean, when people often ask me on interviews like this, like, what's the telltale sign that you have mold? And really, like, the best one I can give is that you have a lot of symptoms and you're
Mhm.
trying your best and you're working with practitioners and you're doing all the right things and it's not working, because that stuff should work, right? Like it
Yeah.
really should. So if it's not working, there is something else.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Are there any signs of mold around the house that we should be aware of?
So a little bit, like visually, you can look for like water staining, like,
Mhm.
maybe there's a black mark on your ceiling that comes up, or there's like white dusty powder that's like made of ring. You can look at like floorboards if they have any blackness, windowsills, around bathtubs, toilets. You can also, touch for wetness. Like for us in our basement, we had some leaking. Like it wasn't like a flood, it was just like, the baseboard would get wet, but what's happening, on the other side of the wall is a lot more. So yeah, there's some visual, some tactile, sometimes musty smell.
Mhm.
What are some other little, well, if you want to get into some simple tools, your home should be 50% humidity or less. So that's another mistake we had living in Oregon. We weren't testing our humidity. We did not run a dehumidifier in our basement, which was sort of I don't know, like a working basement. We had, laundry down there and stuff.
Mhm.
And even if you don't use the basement much, that air circulates. It's not static. So
Mhm.
some people ask me on podcasts like, well, what if it's just in my bathroom? Well, maybe it's okay, but you have to understand, like, air
It's gonna go
circulates.
around. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And am I correct in thinking like these mold spores are also just like floating around your house as the air moves?
Yeah, they become airborne, easily, and they're not visible. They're only visible like in a colony. And then there's these mycotoxins that are even smaller. So about 12 species of mold emit these mycotoxins. It's just sort of like a byproduct, like a waste product, or it could be like a protective mechanism. And those are even harder to detect or trap.
Mm.
And those can penetrate into fabrics, into books. They can get inside the fan in your computer, the back of your fridge. So that's why, a rudimentary kind of thinking about mold or water damage is, well, the first rudimentary one is paint over it, which people do,
Mhm.
especially landlords. Second is just, well, like, just cut it out,
Mhm.
and then it's done. But especially if anybody's been sick in the home and, it is a health situation, you have to think about that it really could be everywhere. So either it needs to be thorough clean job, or, in some cases, like in our case, we really, just, we were so sick and been in the home so long that we lost all our belongings. Literally, like, everything. Like, I have
Mm.
nothing from that era of my life
Mm.
because, we had made mistakes in how we remediated the house.
Mhm.
So things got even, more contaminated. Um, and again, it's not like anything looks wrong with our house, or our stuff, but in a sense, at that time, I didn't associate sickness with the stuff around me. But, like, for example, some of the stuff we put in storage to see if we could recover it, and when we went back to it, it was like boom, instantly very symptomatic. So uh, sometimes you don't fully realize it because you're just in it all the time.
Mhm. Mhm.
But if you were to have a nice big break, you would see, like, yeah, it is actually these things around me affecting me.
Interesting. So, as you say that, I'm curious how long of a time you need away from it. So, let's say like you feel really sick when you're at home and then you're traveling maybe for a week, maybe for a month, you're away, and then you come back and you start feeling sick again. Um, is a week long enough to know whether or not there might be something in your house, or does it really need a longer time to like kind of avoid before going back
That's a
to
great
it?
question. In my opinion, it needs to be longer because I definitely took week-long
Yeah.
trips and I couldn't tell.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, one thing looking back that was happening is when I started to get sicker, it was when I stopped working in my clinic to just do my online business. So I was at home.
Mm.
It was also fall, like a very wet fall.
Mm-hmm.
And I just never thought, about that element.
Mm.
So I didn't think, oh, I'm getting sicker and I'm at home. Like, it never occurred to me, right? So that could be a thing to think about. Like, are you spending more time somewhere and now you're declining? But yeah, it's tough. I mean, now if I go into like a new moldy environment, which isn't very often,
Mhm.
uh, I can tell quickly, if
Yeah.
it's really infested. But when you're in the soup of it, you can't tell so well.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Really interesting because I know like we kind of do these elimination diets sometimes where if you avoid a food for 3 weeks, then you can have like a reaction after and you can see what that reaction is like. So I was curious if the mold had a similar
It might be
pattern or
similar, like
something.
three
Yeah.
weeks. Yeah. Which most of us don't go away quite that long, right?
Right. You're not really ever away
No.
for 3 weeks at a time. That's kind of hard to do. But
Yeah.
if you suspect mold, it might be good to like go away for a month and see what it's like if you come back. Um,
Yeah. Well, I have a little example on that when
mhm,
we moved out of Oregon and like traveled for 2 months, didn't go back to the same house, but went
mhm,
back to the same environment and yada yada. And I mean, yeah, I think any way you kind of mix it up while you're going through this recovery is really good, because it gave us a glimpse on like, oh, we don't have to live here. Living here is making us sick again. Just the
Yeah.
climate alone is making it hard for us to recover. So it's tough because your brain is like mush, and it's hard to think about big changes. Like you said, you just moved, not too long ago. Like maybe you never thought you would, right? But
Yeah.
it's good. Like, so it is really good to mix it up in any way you can. Go stay with somebody at the beach for the summer or whatever it can be, just to see how that influences you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really sage advice to really consider the environment. And we know that, like, at least Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, they have this idea of like your constitution and how that interacts with the environment that you're living in. So the weather patterns in a certain area might not be good for your constitution and you need a drier climate or whatever it is. So I think it's also important to take in your own kind of internal nature.
That's a
uh
great point.
yeah.
Yeah, I think we've sort of lost some of that in our modern society. But yeah, I mean, like you said, like just being in a different environment influences us in a different way. Do you feel the same, on a rainy day in Portland is like at the beach in San Diego on snow? You feel different.
Yeah.
So what you need day after day may be different at certain points in your life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's get into mold and hormones because I think that's going to be like so juicy for our listeners. So, can we talk about how mold is going to disrupt hormone production in women, and then we can go into men's health later as well.
Yeah. So one thing I learned kind of later in the process, once I was fairly recovered, was that so mycotoxins, the thing I said that are emitted by some molds, they're great little travelers. They can cross the cell wall, they can enter into mitochondria, they break down the brain barrier, the gut barrier. So, if we're breathing, which is mostly how we're getting mycotoxin exposure, it's going right up the nose, right into the center of our head, really, where it can break down barriers and travel. And what's right there at the center hormonally is the hypothalamus pituitary. So mycotoxins can actually just land there and inflame those glands directly. So when I saw that, this was now probably 3 years after I had run the Dutch test, I was like, oh, doesn't that make sense? So if your master gland is inflamed, are you going to make and regulate hormones correctly? No way, male or female, right? So that's a big one. I mean, that's enough, but there's more. Right? So some
Yeah.
mycotoxins are also estrogenic, like a lot of toxins, and they act, like an estrogen on the body. So some people will end up in a very high estrogen state. That wasn't me, but that could be the picture you see with some people. Again, you're going to be told, oh, like avoid plastics and eat organic. And I can tell you, I was doing all those things, right? So again, if you're not responding, like there's maybe some more questions to ask. So can be very
Or
high. Go ahead.
I would say, or either you're not responding, or you're like, wait, I already do all that. Like, why isn't this working if I'm already like avoiding plastic and gotten rid of the toxins in my health and beauty aids, et cetera, et cetera? Like, if you've already done those things and you haven't seen any impact to your hormones in a positive way, I think what you're saying is like mycotoxins might be at fault.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, which is kind of the boat I was in. It's like I'd already done all those things. You can also look at your detox pathways, which go hand in hand, but that's another reason that you could be not clearing estrogen well. And then some people will gain massive amounts of weight quickly, even with mold exposure, like 50 pounds in a few months. Or maybe it's just like stubborn, weight loss resistance. So, if it's estrogenic and fat is a storage tissue, that, you have that fat tissue, making inflammation, making more estrogen. So that's another way it can affect your hormones. Another is it really affects the gut microbiome. It's basically guaranteed to screw up the gut microbiome, dysbiosis, infections. So then you're not breaking down estrogens as well, potentially, or exiting them as well. The gut is really important. The gut and the liver all kind of work to help balance our hormones and dispose of hormones. The liver is going to be burdened as well. It's directly toxic to the liver. It's affecting the functionality of the liver. Plus, it's just creating this huge burden. So now I say you have leaky gut burdening the liver, this mycotoxin load. And the mycotoxins are directly attacking the liver. It's going to slow everything down. And then the adrenals can be affected too. They can be basically high or low from the mycotoxin exposure. And I think that can change, similar to the immune system, which can be maybe very responsive at first, but eventually it's going to crash. So I developed some autoimmunity. Other people develop autoimmunity in the presence of mold, and that can affect your fertility potentially too. So those are just like a handful of ways. Like if we keep digging, we keep finding more. Pretty potent, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's a pretty broad impact on hormones and like a lot of different systems that are all being impacted relatively quickly. That may be like, I feel like a lot of practitioners, even myself for quite some time, we had one client, I'll tell you the quick story.
Sure.
One of our clients who had been working with me, and she would just have these like cycles of ovarian cysts, and they would like literally, her hormone levels are normal. We've got all of her estrogen, everything is like in balance. And then all of a sudden, cysts would pop up, and then we'd like do all the detox stuff, get rid of the cysts, and then the hormones would be fine again. And we kept going through these cycles. And after 3 of them, I was like, I don't know. I think we should test for mold. And she was like, no, we don't have mold. Like, that's not a thing. And I was like, let's just test for it. And sure enough, her test result came back for mold. And she was like, well, could it have stayed in my system? Because we did have mold at the house that we left when I first started having these symptoms. And I was like, oh my God, like we could have saved a year's worth of like roller coaster rides with your hormones if we had known that.
Wow,
So,
that's a great example of a lot of things at once. Yeah.
yeah,
First of all, it doesn't always just magically go away when you
right,
move.
right.
That's and the other thing is, people, I don't know if it's just because of not in the public awareness or it's just human nature, but we forget. We forget to
Yeah.
mention things. We forget that they're important, right?
Or like for them, they realized that this mold was in the back of a closet and they only noticed it when they like started pulling out their stuff to move. So they only really saw it for like a brief moment in time. They were like, oh, there's these black spots. Should we be worried about that? And then they were like, well, we're out of here. Who cares? Right. And they
Oh,
didn't connect the dots that
no.
that was affecting them the whole time. But they had moved out by the point at which they had seen the spots. So it was like
Yeah.
hidden
Yeah.
enough for them to like have missed it that whole time.
Oh, how interesting. That's a great example. And that's exactly why I like coming out and talking about it, because
Yeah.
now maybe you hear like a friend going through something or another, and you're like, hey, wait a second. I heard that can actually be like a really big deal,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that's great that you found that.
Yeah, I often feel bummed though. Like I'm like, wow, how did I miss this for a year? You know what I mean? Like we were trying all these things and even me, like I try not to miss stuff, but this was just one of those things that never got flagged or never even connected to not hormonal because her hormones were out of control. Like her
Wow.
estrogen would be at like 380,
Hmm.
360 overnight. Like one cycle
Huh.
completely normal and then boom, it's like 300s. And I'm like, how does that happen? You know?
Wow. I wonder
Um,
if like she would detox some and
yeah,
then it would like blow up
flare
again.
up. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Interesting.
feel like that's what was happening, and it was like the bizarrest thing ever. And I had almost like thrown in the towel, like I don't know if this is gonna be helped. And she's like, please don't give up on me, please don't give up on
Oh.
me. and and I was like, okay, like there has to be something else. And the toxin screen finally helped put the pieces together. So that's like the most extreme example. um since then it's been more in the forefront of like, okay, do we just need to be hyper aware of like putting the picture together when someone has potentially has mold? And I think that it's really important to be aware that these things just come up. Like we don't I think that we don't always tell our practitioners like, oh yeah, we had a leak, a water leak or whatever. Like we're not talking to people about it. So I think what you're saying is so important. It's just like we need to be aware of our environment, and then as providers, like we just need to be like focused on this, because I don't know why, but it feels like mold is becoming such a huge issue.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we're indoors more, and then Wi-Fi and stimulate. It stresses them out too, so it
Hmm.
stimulates their growth. You know, we could say a lot about building materials, and then there's like cross contamination with other toxins. You know, mold isn't the only problem. It is one I focus on personally the most. But yeah,
Yeah.
like I think there, you know, a study was recently going around about how having a gas range, it increases your, you know, chances of childhood asthma in the home. Is
Huh.
anybody even asking, yeah, that simple question? So yeah, I
Oh,
think the environment, you know, the stakes are getting higher and higher, and
yeah.
we're indoors more. The indoor air quality is worse than outdoor
Yeah.
now. So there's a lot of questions to ask. And I didn't ask it either. You know, I was trained in Chinese medicine. So even though maybe we learned about the seasons and this and that, we didn't really learn it in a modern context. So I wasn't asking it either.
Hmm.
Another thing I wasn't asking about was breast implants. And you know, there's
Yeah.
one case that I kind of missed that question. So yeah, it is on us as providers to, you know, just learn more about all environmental factors.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So good and so important. So if we suspect that we might have mold in our house, or that we're have seeing the impacts of mold in our bodies, what should we be thinking about in terms of testing?
Yeah, I was curious, do you do vibrant wellness? I'm guessing by the toxin
I, yeah, we do have a vibrant panel. We also do, I think it's Doctors Data has a mold and mycotoxins panel that's pretty good. Um, I think
Great
there's another
Plains has
company. Yeah.
one. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
4 or 5 companies. You know, honestly, the body testing is almost easier because
Hmm.
it's, I don't see many false negatives. You know, it's fairly affordable. The home is trickier.
Yeah.
Do you rent? Do you own? Do you think it's at work? Do you think it's in your car? Like, so, you know, and then there's a lot of rooms in a home and a lot of potential sources. So it
Yeah.
can be easier to miss in a home if you're not running the right type of test, if you didn't check all the areas. So it's a big conversation. There are some desk tests and some plate tests that you can do, but ultimately, you know, you need, if you do have mold, you're going to need more of a team. Like you may need a real inspector, real remediators. It's kind of like if like your client ran her estrogen test and it was high and then low, it's like, okay, but now, like, what do I do about it? Why
Hmm.
is this happening? It's the
Hmm.
same with the home. It's pretty complicated actually. So I just encourage people to go step by step. Maybe you start with a body test with a practitioner just to know. It may be like your client, it was a past exposure.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do expect a current exposure in your home or work, you're going to probably have to test in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some resources on that to kind of get you started. I think the most important thing is if you suspect it, just don't ignore it.
Yeah. Yeah. Can we maybe highlight that I feel like a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I saw some mold and I put bleach on it. Can we just talk
Yeah.
about that for a second? Because I'm like, no, that is
No.
not the solution.
Yeah, that's another one of those quickies. I mean, it will bleach color so that it sort of looks better, but bleach is mostly water and mold eats water. So if you're putting bleach on a porous surface, which you are, because that's how it developed mold, it's just feeding it actually. It's not, it may look better on the outside, but you're actually
Wow.
just feeding it water.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. What I like, how did this even become a thing? I don't understand why well, I guess because it looks better, we think, oh, the mold went away.
I think if you say that mold was not a health hazard whatsoever,
Hmm.
then aesthetically you just want to make it look like it's not there anymore.
Hmm.
So you
Hmm.
bleach it or you paint over it or both, and that's the end of the story. So I don't, people once they're down this road can get really upset with like contractors and stuff, like not taking this seriously, but often it's just a lack of knowledge.
Hmm.
Like that's the way stains were taken care of for a long time, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I guess that's really why,
Okay.
they're
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense because it's like, well, we just want it to look pretty and we mold as far as a health issue, I feel like is just we're still at the precipice of awareness when it comes to how this is like globally impacting health.
yeah. And as a practitioner, I sort of stayed out of it to some extent. I was like, please don't just get in a big legal battle. Like, just focus on your health. However, I have some colleagues who have started like a nonprofit about legislation and awareness, and they brought up a great point, which is like right now, if there is lead found in the home, asbestos, radon, there are very clear procedures and laws around that,
Hmm. Hmm.
and contractors will follow those. There's just nothing for mold, but there could be
Hmm.
actually.
Hmm.
So that's their goal, is to start state by state to enact some legislation around air quality, rental rights, that kind of a thing. And when they said all that, I was like, wow, okay, I guess I can see that. Uh, and that's pretty exciting. Not every little wet spot in your house or whatever, not everything is going to become a big health problem, but it definitely can. People say, oh, like 50% of buildings are water damaged. If you think about any building over the course of time, 100% of them will sustain water damage. Like, how
Right.
could they not? We have dishwashers, we have storms, we have like all these ways that water can infiltrate the home.
Right.
So it's going to keep happening. So I think that I really salute them for, taking that on, because when they put it that way, I was like, okay, maybe there is some hope.
Yeah, and I guess that's so I'm curious because yes, there is going to be water damage and for someone like me who lives in Houston where it's wet almost all the time, like sort of like Portland, uh I I feel like this is going to be a thing that I talk about with my family for a long time. I'm curious if is there any validity to those like air filters that say they remove mold spores or I believe that our like AC guy at some point had said, "Oh, we can install like a UV filter or something inside your unit." I don't really fully understand it,
Yeah.
but would that actually potentially kill mold spores on an ongoing basis?
I think both of those things are helpful for like maintenance of a
Mm-hmm.
healthy home, right? Like you
Yeah.
can't, and I see this mistake a lot too. Like we found out we had a mold problem, but we bought this $1,000 air filter and we're just cool till we
Yeah.
figure it out. It's like, no, because what did I
Right.
say earlier? All that goes into machinery. You
Yeah.
now ruined the $1,000 air filter.
Yeah.
However, if your house is good, yeah, you can use both those things to maintain it. You can use a dehumidifier. You should, be checking your humidity if you know you're in a humid area. You should
Mm-hmm.
clean your gutters. You
Mm-hmm.
should get your roof, checked periodically. You should make sure that, it's graded to drain away from your home.
Mm.
Things like that. These are just good home maintenance. So
That's
that's a
cool.
lot of good news. Yeah, you can be like, okay, I'm in a wet area or I'm a
Yeah.
homeowner. These are the steps I'm going to take. As indoors too, you can do some certain things like, I mean, nobody thinks about this, including me, but you have a hose from your washing machine to like the pipe, and those often crack and break.
Mm.
They need to
Mm-hmm.
be replaced. Does anyone think about that? No, until it floods. Water heaters now don't last that long, like 5 or 10 years. So just keeping up with things can make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Love it. And I'm like, I think I had one more question that popped into my head. It was, mm, I'm like, oh, running a blank. Okay, nope, it lost me.
It's gone.
It's gone. But yeah, I'm like, I feel like I could pick your brain for so long
It
because
generates a lot of
it,
questions.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like one of these things that we don't talk about enough ever, and it's affecting all of us to a certain extent. Like you said, if 50 to 100% of homes in the US are being exposed to water damage, like this is a really important conversation to just continue having and diving deep into and learning about as much as we can.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Mhm.
agree. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for sharing it with your audience. I really appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have so many stories that we could have gotten into. I was thinking as you were speaking of this other client who refused to do anything about the mold in their house, and they were working with me for fertility. And so they showed me the spot. It was this like kind of maybe 5 or 6 inch spot on their ceiling. And I was like, yeah, that looks like mold. You should probably get it tested. And they were like, well, we're pretty sure it's mold, but we're just going to close off that room and not go in it. Like it's in our bedroom, but we'll just sleep in a different room. And I'm like, I don't think that's enough. Like, I don't know if this is going to
No,
solve the issue that we're
no.
having right now. And
Yeah.
like you already talked about how the air circulates, so it doesn't really matter what room of your house this mold is found in. It's impacting your entire home.
Yeah.
So,
That's something I really had to learn, and I still don't know as much as I'd like to. Like when I started to interview more remediators and inspectors, and like the temperatures and like whatever, like there's a way the air gets pushed around.
mhm.
Like we know now, but we didn't. The public didn't know this 50 years. Like if you have a
Right.
cancerous tumor, that it can spread, right? We know that.
Yeah.
But we don't know that about air. So there's just so much, yeah, that we don't know. And yeah, I mean, my friend's duplex neighbor found mold or whatever and just started sledgehammering open
Yeah.
the walls, and they sent me the pictures, and there's just all this mold and no protection put up
Oh my
whatsoever.
God.
And I'm just like, having
Stop.
having
Oh
a
my
panic
God.
attack just to see it.
Oh
They're
my
like, look,
God.
we are doing the job. It's like, where is your air scrubber? Where is your protective gear? Where is your
Yeah.
plastic sheeting? Like,
Yeah.
so it's really complicated, and it sucks because home expenses, they're just not fun, right? Like I had a roof leak this summer, and I had to have people out like 3 different times, and it was so annoying, and it probably cost me $5,000. It's not fun. Nobody wants to spend the money on that, but you have to,
Yeah.
is kind of the lesson.
Yeah, and same, like we had a place in California where there was some water damage, and I didn't know enough at the time to like dry it correctly or like get professional air drying people in there. That could have probably prevented it. Within a month, there was massive mold.
Yeah.
And I could see I could smell it, right? And I was like, we can't be here. Like, and I was pregnant at the time. Um, I was like 8 months pregnant. So it was like horrible
Wow.
timing. And I was like, I know this is mold. We need it out like right now or yesterday. And we ended up needing to get like professional remediator. I researched the crap out of it because I
Oh,
was like,
good.
I've never dealt with this. How do you deal with this well? And it was essentially like, yeah, they had the plastic sheet thing around it to like go in there and remove, cut it out and all that stuff. And then like the pre and post air testing to make sure that what
Yes.
they did was enough to get the mold out of the whole home. So it's a whole thing. And I feel like it can sometimes feel overwhelming, which is why a lot of people are just like, well, it's mold, let's leave it alone. It's not
Yeah.
affecting us
That's
yet,
what it
you know?
wants, first of all.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it wants.
Yeah, it wants
Here's
attention.
another tip people can think of. Really, everything needs to be addressed within 48 hours. So I see this all the time in Phoenix when I'm driving around. There's companies that do this kind of thing. It's like fire, water, flood, whatever, like they have certain. So, you need to call one of those companies, and you need to call your insurance company. Because guess what? If you don't call your insurance company and do stuff soon, if it is like a sudden thing, if you just neglect it and you call your insurance company a year later, they might
Yeah.
say, sorry.
Yeah. They're like,
You
nope, this is not our responsibility.
yeah. So taking that fast action, especially, whether it's like you accidentally ran the bathtub over, or there was a storm, take it fast. 48 hours is like the window. Like you said, if things stay wet beyond that, chances are they'll grow mold, unless it's like a very dry place. But for the most part, it can grow mold.
Yeah. That's why you moved to Arizona, right?
Not that we're mold free, but yeah, when I knew I had a roof leak, I was like, oh, you're kidding me. And we did replace some drywall and stuff, but it really just did not cause a big problem. So I feel really lucky for that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, I'm so appreciative of you being here today. This has been awesome. I feel like just your wealth of information and you having been through this definitely gives like a nice hope and perspective on like you can get through it. It's gonna suck, maybe. Or it doesn't have to, but it can. And you can get on the other side of it if you have the right team around you.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the happy ending is really available, whether you're trying to get pregnant or just restore your health. So, yeah, it's just sort of like the pill you don't want to swallow, but it's just totally worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I can't wait to hear the rest of your tips. And for those of you listening in, thanks for tuning in. I hope this episode is not overwhelming, but informative and kind of like opening your eyes to what is out there for us to just protect our homes and our bodies, the homes that we live in, to stay in a state of optimal health. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bridgit. And I look forward to everything. Oh, actually, before we get off, where can people find you?
Oh yeah, thank you. My main website is just my name, which is bridgitdanner.com.
Great. Awesome. We will link that. I know we have your Instagram. We will also link that in our show notes. And we'll look forward to hearing your tips. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Was that an amazing episode or what? Make sure to check our show notes so that you can link up with our guests. And if you're not a part of our secret Fertile AF community, you can join for free via the link in our show notes. Last but not least, have you showed us some love lately? It would mean the world to us if you could share and review our podcast. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Egg Meets Sperm. Peace.